16 tons. What do you get? Another day
Ford, Tennessee Ernie Ford, leading us into Peter Kiernan, entrepreneur, best-selling author. Most recent book, American Mojo, Lost and Found, Restoring Our Middle Class Before the World Blows Us By. And Peter, welcome to the John Gambling Show once again.
So great to be with you once again as well.
Thank you. Let's start with, everybody is intrigued with the conversation about my buddy Mike Bloomberg possibly running for the presidency. What's your view of not only that, but its potential of success?
Well, here's the dilemma. The Republicans have done something in the past couple of years which may come back to bite them, which is they advanced their decision meaningfully. They did it in a couple of ways. First, they moved what was an autumn-type convention into July. They were originally targeting June. It's going to be in July. But they did a second thing, which is going to be very powerful that we haven't begun living through. But in about 30 days, a little less, about 28 days, every one of the primaries is going to be winner-take-all. From March 15th, from the Ides of March until Utah, which is the last one, if you win, then you win every delegate. What that means is whoever's got the pole position going into mid-March is likely to develop a commanding lead. So there are a lot of people who talk about brokered conventions. That's going to be very hard if, for example, Donald Trump leaps to that commanding lead. But what's going to happen is that the Republicans are going to figure this out pretty quickly, who it's going to be. It's only 4 or 5 months. Same with the Democrats. The time for Mike to run, if he's going to run, Mike Bloomberg, is very quickly approaching. Now, the challenge for a guy like Mike Bloomberg, who was a great CEO in my opinion, I didn't agree with everything, but he's a pretty good CEO for New York City and been a great CEO of his business, is how does he become emotionally available to the people of the country? By what mechanism can his genius be living side by side in the minds of the electorate with his personality? Who is Mike Bloomberg? And you look at Trump, he is, if anything, he is available. He will say whatever's on his mind, maybe more than we want to hear what's on his mind. Mike, who's a very thoughtful, studious guy, has to compete with that. And that's tough to do when you're starting in March in the 100-yard dash where the other folks are 50 yards ahead of you. So he's got a few dilemmas.
And, Peter, I've never really seen Michael Bloomberg in public attack anybody. And,
he's one of those guys
he would have to do that.
He's going to have to toughen up. I would tell you what I would do if he's not. I'm not an advisor and in fact in any way influential in his campaign. But I think what he's got is the potential to develop a following in the Northeast and the Far West. I think that much we agree could occur. But in that broad swath down the middle of America where a lot of delegates and a lot of votes, and in the South, he's going to need to do something outsized. And to me, an idea might be to look for one of the great Republican runners who is not kind of finishing where he'd like to, like a Kasich. And he says to Kasich, why don't you come and run as my vice president? And you deliver Ohio and Michigan and a lot of those states in the center. Because on his own, that's a lot of heavy lifting. And you're right, he is not a negative campaigner. What he's more likely to do is sit down and give a policy piece because he's a very smart guy. But as we know, sometimes in the rough and tumble of states like South Carolina particularly and others, you got to throw a little elbow. You got to show that you can take a punch and give a punch. And that is going to be an issue for Mike because he starts with the intellect. He's a smart guy. He leads with that. It's always helped him. But he needs another dimension if he's going to run for national office.
I think, too, that, Bernie Sanders has already taken a shot at Mike Bloomberg's even rumored potential run, along with Trump saying if indeed it is Sanders and Trump and Bloomberg, he goes, look at that, you got two billionaires over there, folks. Is that what you want? And to a lot of people's ears, that's a real question.
Look, I would say that it's hard to argue that Bernie Sanders represents an old school notion that we all held when we taught as in grade school, that anybody without money can be president of the United States. And you got to admire the way he's raised his money, without PACs and super PACs and a whole lot of other things. Impossible to ignore that as a feature an important one of the landscape. But to win the national market, there is no way that Mike can do it with a grassroots exercise starting in March. So he's going to have to do something to convince the American people that he is better than the two alternatives. And I believe he's going to have some help in doing that. As good as he is, as rational as he is too much of an unknown, particularly outside Area Code 212.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I would encourage him to run in an instant, but I also know him and his practicality, and I'm going to be very surprised if he does. Pleased, but I'm going to be very surprised. All right, we're talking with Peter Kiernan. His latest book, American Mojo, Lost and Found, Restoring Our Middle Class Before the World Blows By. It is such a timely book. Because everybody is screaming. I loved Donald Trump a week or so ago when he said, "I'm going to be the best jobs president that God ever put on this earth." I mean, he does hang out with a pretty uppity crowd there, Donald Trump.
I was going to say, I heard God was offended by that, but who knows? I think part of the problem that Donald is what Trump is so good at is tapping into what frustrates people. And the difficulty, of course, is that most of the people on the debate stage, in both the Democrat and Republican, are career politicians who've never created a job in their lives. And so what Donald Trump has, is that advantage where he can go in and talk about how you actually do it. I believe in my mind and my heart that the President of the United States, the sitting President Obama, has an opportunity to go out as a jobs creator still in his last 10 months. I don't think that's where he's going to point his spear. I don't think where he's going to point his energy. I think all of it is going to go to some of the other issues, whether it's guns, whether it's appointing another Supreme Court justice. It's going to be something else so that Donald has the opportunity. If you look at what people are worried about in the country, all the polls suggest it's three things in this order. Prosperity, number one. That's jobs and employment and income. And security is number two. And security takes a form of homeland security and anti-terrorism. And the third is what I'll call society, all the social issues. Donald is appearing to be very focused on the first in a way that the other candidates really can't, and I think that's helping him a lot in these polls.
And just this morning, speaking of Donald Trump, reiterating, he goes, when I'm president, he goes, I'm going to tell you, if the Ford Motor Company that is doubling down on building a $1 billion, it could be even more than that, $1 billion automotive plant, they already have many already in Mexico. Other U.S. corporations are moving their businesses to Mexico. And he said, listen, believe me, why are they doing that? I wouldn't allow that to happen. It's not going to happen. Ford will bring back their cars, and they'll have a tax on them, whatever the situation is or whatever the mechanism is for him to do it. But he's absolutely right. NAFTA was a disaster. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a disaster because we're going to get hammered once again.
Well, the presidency is really one of those offices of enormous power. And I've told this story, but in 1941, we were the number one car manufacturer in the world. We produced 3 million cars. No other country even came close. But FDR was in the middle of prosecuting the war, and he called up Ford, and he called up General Motors and the companies that preceded it, and he called up Chrysler, and he said, you're no longer in the car business. Well, what do you mean I'm not in the car business? You are not making cars anymore. And from that day of that phone call to the end of the war, which is 5 years later, they didn't make 50 cars a year, down from 3 million. Because there was a greater good for society, greater good for the nation, which was the prosecution and fulfillment of the needs of the war. I think that this president opportunity is there, and I think Trump is the kind of guy who's willing to break down a few of the barriers, be a little, what I say, not just politically incorrect. He's willing to be incorrect in terms of reaching over and strong-arming some of the people in our nation who are in power to do things more in alignment with the national need. And I don't think that's a terrible idea. I think right now business and government are circling each other warily like a couple of cats, and the disguised contempt is becoming much less disguised, right? They can barely stand one another. When's the last time you saw the president photographed with a passel of government and corporate leaders? It never happens. anymore. If you look at FDR and other presidencies that were Democratic, there was great business fluency. There was lots of involvement of CEOs. Today, there's a big red line separating the government and the corporations, and you cannot bring back our economy.
And
you cannot bring back our jobs without those two working together.
Peter, you know what else? There's also a big red line around government and the people of the United States. They're fed up. They've had it. They think Congress is a joke, which it is. And again, it's the same situation. The government has become so insular. It's become so enormous and gigantic that it can't even hear. It can't even see what corporations are doing or the U.S. business is up to. They can't even see what U.S. people are up to. All they see is the belt is inside the Beltway.
There's no better example than what's going on right now, that you've had a dysfunctional legislature for a while. The executive branch, I would say in many ways, is not functioning at a peak. But you've had, actually, when you look at it, even if you don't agree with everything the Supreme Court has done, you've had a marvelously performing Supreme Court. They've been making the tough decisions. They've been considering the tough issues. Gay marriage, affirmative action, et cetera, et cetera. Now you have a situation where that bench is not at full bench strength, pun intended, and you have people lining up saying, I'm not going to do anything to help satisfy that bench strength for at least another 11 months. I think that's a big mistake. I think anybody who does it doesn't realize the American people are going to be frustrated that government takes the one area of the three branches, the one area that was actually functioning pretty well, even if you don't agree with everything they're doing, and now we're going to dumb it down so it's underperforming as well. I think it's a big mistake, and even if you look at the examples like Kennedy, where Ronald Reagan put in Kennedy in his last year, people say, well, gosh, he did that, so why don't he had two others get turned down in that process. Bork and Ginsburg were both turned down in the process that ultimately resulted in Kennedy getting the appointment. I think we have to have the president do what he's supposed to do according to the Constitution, and he's going to. He's going to come up in some weeks with a handful or maybe one replacements for Justice Scalia. I think it's essential that the Republicans who are leading the Senate do not put up a brick wall and say we're not going to consider anybody. They have to go forward with advice and consent and find somebody that's acceptable to all parties.
I couldn't agree with you.
That's what the American people want.
Because if they block this, they go against the Constitution and the rules. And then on the other side, if indeed there is a Republican president, if it happened again, they'd get hammered, as hypocritical. But I'm not sure that hypocrisy worries them very much. I think they almost lived by it. Peter Kiernan, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, Peter, it's always fun to talk. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Take care of yourself. All right, we continue here on the John Gambling Show, and I will be back after this at AM 970 The Answer.